Hey everyone, welcome to the Story Builder podcast. I am thrilled to be with Chris Vogler. And Chris, a few things about him. He's worked for Disney Studios, Fox 2000 Pictures, Warner Brothers, and also contributed to The Lion King. Chris, thank you so much for being with me on the Story Builder podcast.
It's a great pleasure. I've gathered from a little conversation we had that you're kind of lined up like I am about being helpful and useful to writers and, trying to make things a little easier for them. So I think we'll have a good discussion about that.
Yes, sir. I appreciate that. And I don't want to I kind of skipped it over in the intro, but in case anyone doesn't know you originally, uh, you're very popular for the Writer's Journey book, which I really admire. And it's just such a useful resource. So I have to spotlight that. I'll dive into a little bit more with you, but I wanted to spotlight that too.
Great.
Chris, now you've been involved with story for many years. What are some of your all-time favorites that just you're like always coming back to?
Yes, there were some classics when I was coming along in the business that, revealed principles to me. I used to refer to them when I was writing my reports for the studio, because that's basically what my job was most of the time, was a story reader or story analyst. You read the scripts and you write a report and you try to give a recommendation. And so I would often mention certain films. And one that stuck out was An Officer and a Gentleman. This film about a young man who's from a rough background, military background, but he wants to pull himself up to be an officer. And it was about ambition and love and, a number of interesting themes, but just beautifully constructed. And so I would refer to that long after people had forgotten about the film. I was still going, hey, go back and take a look at that one. And then, in my own development as a writer, I loved sort of the classics, and only as an adult now am I getting to the original sources, these things, but I experienced them through the movie versions of things like The Three Musketeers and The Count of Monte Cristo and, adventure things like that. And some Charles Dickens, I loved A Christmas Carol for its structure. And, I love the way these things landed in the movies, and there were so many variations of them, that there was a comedy version of The Three Musketeers and more serious and musical and all sorts of ways that these things were stimulating stories in people. But for me right now, the mainstream of sort of input to me is a series of books by a man named Patrick O'Brian that goes under the name the Master and Commander series. And of course, Russell Crowe and Peter Weir made a wonderful film out of one of those books, or parts of several of those books. And I'm just addicted to them. And they're just so beautifully written and constructed. And especially from the character point of view, they go deep. And that's important now, because we're in this world of streaming and where we've stretched out the idea of a story, at least on one end of the spectrum. And writers are expected to go very deep into characters and just keep revealing more and more surprises and, background things. And you have the breathing room to do that. And so he's a good model, Patrick O'Brian.
I'm familiar with the movie. Blew me away. I've heard about it for years. Finally saw it, and that Master and Commander, and I was just like, "Wow, this is like how is it not bigger? How is it not very mainstream? It had so much just scale and scope and depth." And I've seen the book, but I haven't read it. I will admit it's a weighty tome, and
Yes.
I think that was a little intimidating to me because, total honesty, you can watch the movie in one night versus that book. How many? I don't even know how many pages. I remember it was pretty long,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I was just thinking that would take quite a while to get through.
Yeah, the first one is kind of a mountain you have to climb, and then the other books are slightly more streamlined. But the author takes no prisoners. You know, he doesn't have mercy on you in terms of throwing out nautical terms, medical terms, science terms, things about animals. There's a lot of Latin in the book, a lot of French, and he just goes, you know, plows right through it, and you have to kind of rush along to keep up with him or have something handy, reference books handy. But there's something breathtaking about that, about the courage of it. And it's kind of spoiled me for other writers of historical fiction or almost anything, because it's also so poetically put together. And I appreciate that. You know, it's always a struggle in writing between just the expectation to be clear and simple and just say what you mean and get it out there. And then there's the poetry side, and you need a mix of both in your work. You can have a great plot and lay it out very kind of almost scientifically, but there's some dimension missing if there aren't metaphors, if there aren't some colorful expressions or you know, ways of looking at things that make it you know, a deeper experience. So this guy, he's got it all.
That's awesome. I have to compare this to an analogy for you, Chris. I don't know if you'll take this, but I almost would look at it like ice cream. Not many people want just vanilla. They want like Rocky Road. But if you put too much in the ice cream, before you know it, it's not even about the ice cream. It's about all the other flavors and toppings, and it might even be too rich. You know, so yeah, it's that balance, you know, and now I'm hungry.
Yeah. Yeah. People want to put pickles in the ice cream and, you
Right?
know, these
Hot
other
chocolate. Yeah.
hot dogs and, yeah, all
Yeah.
these other things. Yeah, I had the same experience that it was a little daunting at first. A friend tried to turn me on to it many, many years ago, 40 years ago, maybe. And I just couldn't get through it. And then unfortunately he passed away, and sort of in his honor, I went back to the book, and then I was in it and read through the whole. There's 20 books in the series, and I've read through the whole thing at
Right.
least 5 times.
That's
The people
great.
who love this, we have a Facebook group, interest group for Patrick O'Brien, and people talk about it as circumnavigating. If you've been through all 20 books, you've done a circumnavigation, and many people do it over and over. So,
That's awesome. That's awesome. I really appreciate that in-depth response. And I shouldn't expect anything less from you, Chris, knowing how, like with your book, you took all these concepts from Joseph Campbell and you kind of put your spin on it, your experiences, even applying it to modern movies and how you kind of digested the information. It makes sense because I think you kind of work on like how you work is like on layers. It's like, okay,
mhm.
first pass, second pass, third
Yes,
pass, right?
yes, that's true. Um, yeah, was looking for these patterns. You mentioned that before, and I I just had the sensation there must be something. What we today we would say an algorithm. You know how you routinely handle a particular set of circumstances, and what are the routines and patterns that you apply. So I was looking for that, and I really couldn't find it, even in film school. I went to the USC Film School, and if you can believe this, there were no screenwriting books at that time. This was in the mid 70s. Just to try to imagine a world without any screenwriting books, and now we have quite a few. There were playwriting books that they used in the curriculum, but nobody had really written until Sid Field came along, and he wrote a book called Screenplay, and that was a breakthrough because this was all secret knowledge. Really, it was held tightly as professional secrets, and very, very selfishly or guardedly passed down. And so he just blew it open by publishing it and putting it out there where anybody could get it. And it really opened up a whole world. And then my publisher, Michael Weezy, um, got into this with the same attitude I think you have of opening the doors for people, and just, you know, if you find something, tell people about it, share it, and let them run with that ball,
Yeah.
and I always like it when they jump off from me or from Campbell
Yeah.
or whatever source, and they go, yeah, that's great, but you know what? I've made my own discoveries, and I
Right.
love
Right.
that. Yeah,
Almost like building on that, like historically from you
yeah,
learn from
yeah.
your ancestors, you learn from your mentors. And I have to full disclosure here. I didn't believe much at all in the hero's journey. I
Hmm.
thought it was dated. I thought it was only a good fit for certain genres and certain kinds of stories.
I'm not familiar with that.
And
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? And then I worked with John Booker for about 2 years, and I'm still in touch with him, and he inspired me to kind of connect with you with your book. And working with John kind of lifted the uh kind of just the I almost had my eyes closed
yeah,
toward the hero's journey. And then in your book, when you broke down Pulp Fiction, my mind just went, "Whoa, hold the phone here. I was wrong. It's all in there. It's just I wasn't really looking for it." And also, we all process information a little differently. When I look
hmm,
at Pulp Fiction, I'm like, it's just a few short stories that were kind of meshed together. And uh, I don't, I mean, it was really tropes, honestly, and they were just kind of meshed together. And then Tarantino shook up the bag and said, "Here you go." And but when I look at your book and you break it down, I'm like, oh, wait a second. There's a whole lot more here. I'm just kind of, almost making the hero's journey the equivalent to Star Wars because of just my age and when I grew up. I was like, okay, well, these are the same thing, and I'm like, no, that's just even Star Wars. It's just one variation, really, of the hero's journey, especially as you kind of dig a little more into the trilogy. Yeah, sure, 77 is really in line with the hero's journey. But I was thinking about it, Chris, and I would love your spin on this. I think that, you know, there's so much freedom in the hero's journey. It's not like, okay, you must do this, you must do that. It's not as cut and dry as some folks like my former self might have thought.
right, right. Well, listen, I did too. In the beginning, when I first, tripped over these ideas, Campbell's ideas in film school, I thought, oh, great, that's now a certain category of things is covered, and I know exactly how that works, and it's simple. And so we've got a hero, and he looks like a hero, and it's a he, and the villain is going to be obviously villainous and wear a black suit and a black hat and sneer and have a twirling mustache and a whole pile of cliches. And then I started working with the ideas in the studio system and going, okay, here's a script that has nothing to do with all of that. It's not about adventure. There's no even hero. It's just people going through something. But I found Campbell's ideas did help to digest it, interpret it, understand it. And then I kind of switched gears to kind of make that case in the studio system that all the executives got it right away on this level of this is our answer for maybe adventure things, maybe children's programming, fairy tales, things like that, fantasy, superhero, but not for the other stuff, not for comedies, not for serious dramas. So I made the case, oh, yes, it works just as well, sometimes better as a tool for managing those things. And I think that idea has now spread, and people get that this is a more universal thing.
I know you've really kind of broke through with a 7-page memo,
Yeah.
and it caught fire with romance authors
Yes.
specifically. And I'm looking at it, again, if you back up a little, go, romance authors, what does that have to do with the hero's journey? But clearly you found the overlap between, and also in your book, you kind of break it down. It's like not every hero looks a certain way. And I think
Right.
maybe that's one of the I guess pitfalls for a lot of writers.
Mhm. Yeah, sure. It's easy to fall into these things, or be, lazy about it, or casual about it. I was delighted by that initial embrace from the romance writer gang. I went to the Orange County Romance Writers monthly meeting, and got a very good reception there. And that told me that this had applications outside of, let's say, the world of comic books or some other adventure oriented thing. And I mean, they write adventure romances along with gothic romances and science fiction romances and fantasy romances and religious romances and every kind of genre. But they told me that the thing is, they do mass production. If you're a successful romance writer, you have to write a lot. And
Yes.
you sometimes might have to take on uh, 3 or 4 pseudonyms and write under different genres,
Hmm.
and create different identities and chains of
Hmm.
books. And so they had to, have a more systematic way to
Yeah.
do it. And they found that very useful. And I love this too. They made it their own. They didn't just
Yeah.
accept it exactly as I gave it. They said, yeah, yeah, that's great. And we get this part and that part. But for us, really, we want to emphasize, other things. And they added to it and, changed the language to suit them. And I was never threatened by that. I just thought it was great. That's what I want. And that's what I did with Campbell.
Right.
Campbell was not addressing screenwriting. He had hardly seen any movies. He
Yeah.
famously said, I watched some Charlie Chaplin movies, and
Right.
then I watched 2001,
Right.
and nothing in between. So
Yeah.
he missed the 30s, 40s, 50s,
Yeah.
60s, and didn't care about that, because he had other things on his mind.
Right.
Um, but I felt like that was my job, was to translate this useful stuff into the language and of screenwriting. And that involves some changes or different emphasis, different language slightly. And so I'm pleased that some of that stuck and did turn out to be useful, because that's the whole thing for me. I'm like a sheepdog. I'm my tail wags when I'm being used
That's
to,
good.
herd the sheep
Yeah.
or whatever. I don't
Yeah.
want to think of it as that my users are sheep, but that it just excites me and pleases me when people get something out of it.
Right. In a sense, that's kind of a attitude of collaboration because you're supporting each other, you're kind of working together. Even as you do with romance writers, I'm curious, like when you helped contribute to The Lion King, was that kind of the same thing where it's like, hey, we're coming together, I'm contributing some ideas, you're bringing some ideas, just that whole, it doesn't matter whose it is. It's like the best idea. Let's just make it the best we can.
Yeah, you can ask the question, who really wrote The Lion King, or who made The Lion King, or who's responsible for that.
Yeah.
And the you can get many answers. Um, the real answer is about 300 or 400 people who just kept throwing their ideas at it. Maybe the same idea, like I had some ideas that I can point to and say, I think
That's
that's there
incredible.
because I was in a
Yeah.
meeting and I said something and everybody kind
Yeah.
of went, oh, that's a great idea. But maybe 20 other people said the same thing.
Right.
And that weight of that, all those people saying, hey, why don't we try that? Was what landed in the movie. I sometimes, because the internet is so sloppy journalistically,
Sure.
I get credit for writing The Lion King, and that's just ridiculous. And I
Right.
hope to, cancel that every chance I get. I have credit on it, but it's on a card with about 50 other people that
Right.
says additional story material by, and you have to freeze the frame and look very carefully to find my name. So I didn't write The Lion King, but I got my punches in, and there's a few things in there that are clearly mine, and probably, like I said, 20 other people.
What do you think of now? If you look and turn behind you, you have the Lion King on your wall because
Yeah.
obviously you're very proud of that. What do you think of it now? Do you think of all those many people that you worked with? What comes to mind?
Well, I just enjoyed. There's kind of a drama around it for me personally
Okay.
because I had worked with animation and actually was, in their offices for a while um, when they were transitioning. I think from the old Disney days to the new Disney that created Little Mermaid and Beauty and the Beast and so forth.
Okay.
And then I got out of it, went back over to the live action side. But I found myself back on Lion King because it just seemed to the management of the studio, it seemed like this is a good match for this idea, the Vogler's idea, Campbell's idea.
Yeah.
And I thought I'll have to sell it to him when I go over there to the animation building. But I walked in and there was a cork board. They work with cork boards a lot. They pin
Okay.
things up. And there was a cork board in the lobby that had the Lion King already outlined according to my 12 points
Yeah.
that I derived from Campbell. So it was already sold. They had my memo had preceded me, this 7-page memo, and it did all that work for me. So it was a happy thing where they were just ready for it. A lot of people got it, and I was able to get in some good contributions. And they asked me to kind of give me the hero's journey of what I thought it was, and also
Sure.
compare it to Hamlet because they were consciously borrowing pieces from Hamlet, and they even asked me to compile for them a list of the well-known lines that most people would recognize, like "Alas, poor Yorick, I
Yeah.
knew him well," and that got turned into a line of dialogue for Scar, the villain, who
Mhm.
said, "Alas, poor wildebeest, I chewed him well instead of I knew him well."
Right.
So they
That's
they
so
made they
cool.
made use of my research.
A lot of people wouldn't catch the Hamlet
Mhm.
influence, I don't think, because of the aesthetic too, and it's like just the nature. I mean, there's so much, and it's almost like the underlying story is there, but we're distracted too by the visuals and the music, and there's just so much with a film to
Mhm.
distract kind of from that simple story underneath it all, that screenplay. It's
So
there's so many things to go that are going on.
yeah, I was very, very lucky because I moved around. I went to different studios. I would go typically just by luck. I happened to land at studios as they were going through a transition like this. And
Mhm.
so I got to see a little of the old guard and then the new regime come in with different
Wow.
ideas.
Yeah.
And man, I just was soaking up all the kind of corporate thinking and the way the leaders like Jeffrey Katzenberg and Michael Eisner and these
Mhm.
other people had. And from Eisner, I got the idea of family. Everything had to be familyfied. That he didn't use that term, but he just felt like if it didn't have the family dimension in it, and it wasn't going to fly. And famously, before Disney, he worked on Golden Girls
Okay.
and the TV show. And it was, I think, his inspiration to get 3 generations going. And
Yep.
I think that it originally had been pitched with older women and younger women, but he said, no, put a great grandmother type in there, and then we get better family.
Yeah.
And then Katzenberg's thing was, a number of good principles. Like he just said, it's got to be about something. It has to have a theme.
Right.
So he would almost force the teams, the story teams, to think in those terms, and that really helped.
I think that theme or concept, whichever way you want to define it, of family in many, many, many stories, that is the unifying principle. Even in some of the stuff I've written over the years, I'm like, oh yeah, the story is really about a son and a father, or whatever, or The Godfather. It's really about a son and a father,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
it's just so interesting when you kind of view it through that lens. It's almost like a magnifying glass, at least for me. Like
Yeah.
once you identify the themes, you're like, oh, Wow, it's right there. And I don't know, Chris, and over the years, have you noticed like certain themes just jump at you and you're like, there it is again, keeps popping up. Does that happen
Yeah,
for you?
I do. I think, one that I'm seeing just right now, recent stories have been exposed to is the whole idea of control versus loss of control. That people maybe desperately, they feel out of control in their lives. So they try to do something to get control over other people, over themselves. And then almost inevitably, the story says, no, you're going to be in a situation where you'll be completely out of control. The
Right.
harder you try to grab on, the more you'll be taken out of your comfort zone, and that makes for good entertainment. That's suspenseful, and people like to see that because we all
Hard.
experience it.
Right, exactly. And it's like the harder you try, the more things unravel. And
Hmm.
it's almost like a train wreck in a sense where you can't look away because
Hmm.
you know the intentions behind it and you're seeing all this unfold. Um, are there any tropes that jump at you? You're always kind of like, I always like this trope because I think there are certain tropes. It's like, even if they're overdone and you see them a lot, I think some of them just resonate where it's like, you see it and you don't mind. You're not like, oh, this isn't overdone. I always enjoy this. Are there any that jump at you like that?
Yeah, I want to say a word about tropes in a
Sure,
second. Just that word itself,
please.
because I like the word origins, and there's a story there. But you could say trope, you could say cliche, or you could say pattern, or different things. And of course, we don't want cliches. But as a writer starting out myself,
Mhm.
I liked those cliches. I identified, it was fun for me to see, oh, there it is in the Three Stooges movie, and there it is in, To Kill a Mockingbird, and there it is in, some Disney movie. So
Right.
the same kind of pattern, and there's a pleasure in that. And as a writer starting out, you want to participate in the cliche, and you
Why
want
not?
to
Right.
add another piece to it, or try it again, or get people to recognize, oh yeah, I saw that someplace else, and there it is again. And there is a kind of pleasure about that. But the obligation, I think, as you mature as a writer, is to use those things and play on the fact the audience probably knows this, recognizes it,
Hmm.
maybe sees you building up to it, and they're kind of either poised there to catch you in a cliche, or they're watching to see, are they going to do a twist on this? And that's what you want. You want to do the twist. And that brings me to a little sidebar about this word trope, which is a Greek word, as almost everything in our language of movies and drama, including drama, uh, are Greek words. Catastrophe and just almost any actor, all these basic scene, all these things are Greek words. And trope has to do with straps or strips of some material, like you would weave together to make a basket.
Hmm.
And it's embedded in the word catastrophe, which trope or
In
strophe
there.
means also twisting.
Okay.
So it covers plot twists, because many of those tropes are plot twists. And so a word like catastrophe is built out of kata, means down. So a catastrophe is where the story's going along, and then something happens and it twists down, and the fortunes of the hero take a crash. And I just love, playing around with these sources, with these origins of words, because you get a lot out of it. So all these English words, stripe and strip and stropping, which is to sharpen a razor on a piece of leather. All those things go back to this idea, but we're weaving something, and we're
Mm.
taking the different lines or the threads of the story and literally twining them together, maybe tying knots in them,
Hmm.
whipping one over the other to intertwine people, and then maybe they get cut apart or they fly apart. So there's this beautiful metaphor system that I think is helpful to you when you're thinking about your story. How am I going to weave this thing together so it looks like a complete design for people, and yet have this delight of seeing things go a certain way and then turn in an unexpected way, so it's not a cliche.
So long story short, you're kind of like, hey, I like all tropes if you throw a twist in there, because
Yeah,
you're really running the twist. You're wanting like,
yeah,
hey, here's Chris's take on this idea, this general concept. Here's Jim's idea plus the trope, and that's what makes it unique versus cookie cutter, same kind of, we saw this in The Lion King. We're going to take this same kind of scene and put it again here. I think I guess that's where a trope would kind of get little dull, because if there are no twists, what are we doing, right? There isn't really
yeah.
a conflict.
Yeah,
Right.
I love things like Robot Chicken. I love crazy animation shows like that, because they're dealing almost entirely in these tropes and just attacking them, and tearing them to pieces and turning them upside down, and playing on the fact that how this is supposed to go. So if they introduce a Superman animated doll, he's supposed to be brave and so forth, and then they squash him flat or
Right.
something,
Right.
and a big
Yeah.
ball of kryptonite flattens him, and there's a delight in that, because you're
I like
participating.
that. I like
Yeah,
that playful approach. You're literally like just toying with it and experimenting versus like, hey, here's the obligatory scene. In your mind, it's more like, no, we're gonna make everything count. It's not
and
really
the other one
obligatory.
I love is the Rick and Morty show.
Okay.
I mean, their sort of story showrunner Dan Harmon is very big on this hero's journey idea, and they even brought Joseph Campbell in. He's a character who appears in Rick and Morty shows, and they get to quiz him, and they get to challenge him and make fun of him, and it's just delightful to see that they're self-conscious, which could be a bad thing. When people became conscious of the hero's journey, and also just general, like what Sid Field gave us, the basic story structure,
Mm-hmm.
it had a deadening effect, where everybody was like, okay, I get it, and that's enough. And I think that's the end of discussing this. But then you find that these things have more life, and you can always find other ways to twist it, and that's where the joy is.
Have you ever, just in your years, seen your books, your approach with the hero's journey applied to nonfiction?
Mm-hmm.
Because most of the time it seems to apply more to fiction and like general stories, but say it's like, I don't know, even a business book or something you normally wouldn't apply toward, the hero's journey.
Yeah, it has amazed me. I am in a phase right now that I would call sort of the harvest of the planting that I did over the decades,
Hmm.
and that's part of the joy of it, is that people are coming to me from other disciplines that have perhaps nothing to do with storytelling per se, and yet they are still using stories to communicate. And it started years ago with a travel agent who came to me and said, I'm not a writer, but I heard your presentation.
Hmm.
And she said she used it for scientists who were going to the Antarctic on a kind of a scientific vacation. And she said, these are the 12 things that are probably going to happen to you. And they came back and said, oh my God, everything you said. We almost died. We almost fell into crack in the ice, and we almost froze to death. And we came out of it, and we were enlightened, and we had an insight and breakthrough. And they even said, this is how we do scientific experiments. So what it told me was that the hero's journey is this pattern embedded in stories, but there's something else going on. There's something about the structure of the universe, or the way people go through things, the way people face a new situation and try to make sense of it and try to overcome the obstacles and come through with some new understanding. It could be as simple as that, but that has applications in many things, in business and in education and in the healing areas. People are using this in prison writing programs and in rehabilitation of veterans who are traumatized, and in many other areas. These ideas are fruitful. So I'm really pleased about that.
It's almost like the hero's journey is part of our human experience. And through that lens, we can say, well, of course, if you're in AA and you're even going through that, it's going to mirror a lot of the hero's journey. Or if you're on a weight loss journey, it's going to mirror a lot of that. Or even if you're learning something new in general, say it's a new computer language,
Mm-hmm.
you're the one going through the journey and facing the threshold and all the many different steps. And guess what? A mentor might be really, really handy if
Right.
you're learning a completely new computer language too, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Or if
So,
you find if you don't have a mentor, then you have to dig down inside yourself. Yeah, I think sometimes that it's like something like colors, the color spectrum. The color spectrum exists, but until humans came along and looked at it and said, "Well, that's pretty," and I see there's this thing over here that's kind of like blood, and there's this thing over here that looks like the sky, and this thing over here that looks like clouds. So
yeah,
let's call it red and blue and white.
right.
And just started giving names to it, and then scientifically studied it and realized that it was vibrations of light, but it was already there. And I think that's what we're dealing with here, and that it is something that is hardwired into the human nervous system, and that it's part of evolution, and that we evolved this ability to imagine scenes, imagine people who don't exist. There was a little girl who lived on the other side of the mountain, and there was a big giant over there. And, these pictures come in your head almost as real or even more real than the world around you. So we did that as a species, I think, for survival reasons, because it helps you. It helps you to put a frame around things and make a metaphor and a model of whatever you're studying. And I think that's what we do with stories.
And on that note, I think in some ways your book is like a color wheel where we can see it and break it down and kind of view the spectrum like that. And frankly, any tools that we make to help each other as writers, as storytellers, they probably fall more in that color wheel kind of definition if we apply that loosely and say, we're just trying to help you see what's already there. We're just trying to help, guide you. So on that note, I have to ask about your book because I have 3 different versions here. This is version 2, I have version 3, and then your most recent version. And each one is like 100 pages longer than the one before. And I just, as a writer, I'm looking at it going, how do you keep making new versions? Are you just adding more and more things that you find helpful? What's going through your mind, Chris, as you're just adding more and more to the book?
Well, some of that was, at the behest of the publisher, who said you really have to produce maybe 30% more or different in order to justify doing a new edition. Because people want to know, why should I already have the first one or the second one? Why should I buy the third or fourth one? And so, we look for things to add. But also, this is a feedback loop. And the first book was a stone I threw in the pond. And then I watched the ripples coming back. And I traveled and I went to different cultures. And I also went to different studios and worked on different kind of films. So I had all that I could sort of plow back into it. And I found I really wanted to share the technology, I would say, of it that I had discovered. That working on editing a film or working on something collaborative like The Lion King, I had learned some new principles. That's really what I always have been about, is discovering these principles that have universal application and that you come back to all the time, that are tools in your box. But using the tools in unusual ways is something I'm studying right now. There's a lot of X or Twitter, TikTok things
Uh-huh.
about using tools in unusual, weird ways, to get weird, different effects. And I love that. And that's what I'm kind of exploring now.
You're always playing in different ways, aren't you,
Yeah,
Chris? You're just kind of like, hey, let's try this, let's try that. And I love
that's
that
right.
attitude because you're never bored. You're always trying something new or looking at it in a new way.
Mhm.
And that's really exciting. Any words of advice for other writers out there? Because I know personally, every writing project has its own, challenges. Every book has its own challenges. What would you say to the other writers out there who are right in the middle of a project?
Well, everybody has a cycle, and this is the hero's journey of the writers. It's partly why I called the book The Writer's Journey, because there was this very strict parallel, that whatever's happening to the heroes you write about, something like that is happening to you. You're tearing yourself open. If you're doing it right, you're turning yourself inside out and reaching deep, and asking questions about yourself, and you're going to run into monsters and demons and your own fears and all that heroic stuff. So I have that orientation for people, is to just know you're going to have scary things. You're going to feel that this is a waste of time at some point. It's inevitable. You're going to hit that bottom, as famously Francis Coppola did making Apocalypse Now. At a certain point, he was ready to burn the negative because he was so upset and ashamed it wasn't turning out like he thought. And so, fortunately, he overcame that. He got past that, and reached out to some other sources. So, these things are going to happen, and it's great to have some medicine for that, and some reassurance that there is a pattern to it. And my piece of advice is just to say, just keep going through it, keep going till you get there, and that will help you. I'll just tell you the little story where that comes from. I was on a quest or pilgrimage looking for the studio of an artist I admire, Winslow Homer, and we were in Maine, on a peninsula where he worked, and we got lost. And my wife forced me to get out of the car and ask for directions, which I don't like to do. But the only person in sight was a guy under his car, and I just saw his feet sticking out from under the car.
Yeah.
And I asked the boots, excuse me, could you tell me how to get to Winslow Homer's house? And in Maine, usually they say, you can't get there from here, because the coastline is so choppy. But he rolled out from under the car and he looked up at me and he said, just keep going till you get there. And I realized, oh my God, I'm on a peninsula and there's only one road. So if I just keep going, I'm going to hit the thing sooner or later. And I did. But I thought that's great universal advice. And
That's
so I
so
passed
funny,
on.
but it applies. That's
Yeah, it
amazing. That's
applies.
so
Yeah,
good.
just keep going till you get there. Kind of cuts through all of those fears and confusions and getting lost, which you will do. But you embrace your fear and you say, "I know you, Mister Fear. I recognize you. I've dealt with you before," and so you don't hold the terror anymore, and then you go on.
Fantastic. I really appreciate that, Chris. That was amazing. And is there any way other writers can learn more about you and your website? What is your website again?
Well, the best way to reach me, I don't have an actual website, but I have
Okay.
a blog on WordPress, and it's
That's it.
chrisvogler.wordpress.com. And there I have, on the top of that right now, is a handout that I give in my classes, and that gives the general outline and some pointers. And then some kind of war stories about things, projects I've worked on, and observations I've made. So that's a good
Awesome.
way to get into it.
Awesome. I, of course, highly recommend your book. This is the most
Thank you.
recent version. I'll be sure to include links to those. Thank you so much for being with me, Chris.
My pleasure. And again, I think we're on the same wavelength here about being positive and encouraging, and telling people, if you want to do it, you can do it.
Absolutely. Totally agree with you. Thank you.
Thanks, Jim.